new episode of Outside the Panel with your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Outside the Panels with me, your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes. Joining me today from the sunny shores of California, no less, we have writer, creator of Grief, as well as the up-and-coming Dead End Kids. And we're talking, of course, of Frank Gogol. Frank, did I get
How's it going?
That's the first thing. Did I get the surname right? I have a tendency screwing people's names up.
You know what? I've had people ask and then screw it up anyway. You nailed it.
Woo! I interviewed Stefan Seach, and I asked him a couple of times how you pronounce his surname, and when I went to say it, I still got it wrong, and I'm not sure I said it right there. So if you're listening,
his name has like 13 letters, and none of them make the sound they're supposed to. So that I think you get a pass.
13 letters and 2 vowels. Yeah, it's it's kind of Welsh, but never mind. So we're here to talk about a couple of your books. We're going to touch a little bit on Grief, and then we're going to talk a lot about Dead End Kids, which I have to say I was lucky enough to read as an advanced review on Comic Crusaders, and I absolutely enjoyed it. Great book. We're going to start at the top and work our way down, so I'm sorry if this is kind of a rehash for some of the questions you've probably been asked before, but what is it about comics that interested you, and how did you break into them?
Oh, all right. So that is a actually very long question. I think I've not yet found a way to. I haven't found a way to tell it distinctly, but this actually starts in 1987.
Is this how I Met Your Mother?
Well, yeah, if you've got time. But I was born in 1987, and just a couple years before that, a little comic called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out. And in 1987, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon came onto the air. And just a couple years after that, when I sort of started having consciousness, I really fell in love with the Ninja Turtles because of that cartoon, and sort of worked my way backwards to the comics eventually. But really started there. Like some of my earliest sort of loves were Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers and Spider-Man the animated series, Batman the animated series. So I sort of came in through the back door of TV and cartoons. And I didn't actually end up picking up my first comic until 2006. I was a senior in high school, so I was heading off to college soon. Marvel Civil War was about to kick off. My local newspaper sort of covered Spider-Man getting a new costume, and I was like, that sounds pretty cool. So I went into my local comic shop, picked up Spider-Man 528, and just like fell in love. Ended up buying all of Civil War, all the tie-ins, wasting a lot of money on some just okay books. But I really just sort of dove in with both feet, or whatever the phrase is, and fell in love with comics. So yeah, like I don't know. Once I started reading, I never wanted to stop. I think I've probably read on average 30 comic books a week for the last 13 years. It's probably more some weeks and less than other weeks, but I'm a very voracious reader. I was actually reading before we synced up this morning. Cool. So that's how I got into comics, and then the writing just sort of was always, I don't know. You read Dead End Kids. There's a lot of me in there, and a lot of it is drawn sort of from this very troubled childhood I had. So I would, I had all these sort of demons inside me that needed to come out, and that's sort of where Grief came from on some level, and to a larger extent even Dead End Kids. So the writing was just sort of a natural extension of the life I had lived, and wanting to sort of put some good karma out in the world and see if I can help people through writing.
Cool. Did you get a bit of a culture shock? Because if you kind of got into comic books the back door, as you say, and you're kind of into the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon, going back to that early Eastman Laird stuff, it is a shock to the system if you're used to the more, dare I say, saccharine cartoon show.
I didn't hit Turtles until a little bit later. I was probably in my 20s when I read Ninja Turtles finally, and by then I'd read Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns and some of that like mid 80s, darker stuff. And I'd read some Daredevil, which Ninja Turtles is sort of a parody of. So I think I had, between Frank Miller and Alan Moore and sort of the later stuff like Grant Morrison, like I wasn't too shocked by it. I think the artwork sort of like shocked my eyes. Some of that Kevin Eastman's a wonderful creator, and he's put something I love very much on this planet, but his art there's not a lot of sort of contrast. It's a lot of dark tones and thick lines, and it can be a little bit of a slog isn't the right word, but it's definitely a different reading experience. I actually just over the last weekend picked up copies of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, 3, and 4 first prints at a convention I was working at. And I was flipping through the second one. And like the difference between the first one and the second one is kind of mind blowing. Like there's a lot more white on the pages and it's a little easier to digest. The first one it's pretty wild, but I mean, I love them. Like they're still fun stories. Like they do exactly what they're meant to. No one expected these to be like Charles Dickens or Van Gogh. Like these are self-made, indie comics from the 80s.
Yeah, the black on black style, heavy inks. It's my first wife was very similar to yourself, and she got into Turtles via the cartoon. I was buying comics at the time, so I bought her a couple of Turtle comics. She was like, "What's this?" I was like, "Well, this is the original. This is what started it all." And she was totally took it by surprise. In some ways, it reminds me, the distinction, I guess, is when you read Star Wars #1, the very first one from Marvel back in the 70s, before they had any sort of like still shots. It's Howard Chaykin with lots of big, heavy lines and lots of heavy inks. And then by issue 2, it's all nice, smooth lines and very photorealism. You kind of like the two. You have to check twice to make sure it's the same artist. So it's cool. You mentioned there that Dead End is kind of influenced by yourself in your life experiences. What other inspirations do you have? I mean, grief is demonic in its ways that it kind of shows the things that are going on behind the scenes, behind the curtain, as it were. The choice between doing something that's kind of the things that you're trying to hide and are seeping into the world versus the existence of that world. How do you kind of get that inspiration to sort of think, I need to put this down on paper? It's a couple things. There's sort of the things that inspire me and then the things that have happened to me. So on the one hand, like I mentioned, I had like a less than stellar childhood. Both my parents really struggled with drug addiction. My father passed away when I was about a year and a half old, so I didn't really get to know him very well and sort of grew up with a little bit of a void in my life. When my mom did remarry, my stepfather wasn't like the best guy. And like these are all sort of almost stereotypical problems people have had like at this point. Like you see it a lot on TV and movies. But it was how I grew up and how a lot of the kids that I grew up with grew up as well. So some of that ended up on the page in both of those books. On the other side of it, the kind of storyteller I want to be sort of really influenced a lot of this too. I'm a very big Joss Whedon fan. Buffy the Vampire Slayer was probably my awakening to storytelling. Like I remember watching the first season of Buffy in 1997 when I was 9 years old and 10 years old. I wasn't even 10. Those skirts are way too short for a 9-year-old to watch. I'm just saying.
Look, you know what? I know that now, but at the time I wasn't upset. But like seeing it was TV metaphor, so it wasn't exactly like the most elegant, but like seeing whatever problem Buffy had that week or one of the cast members have that week sort of manifest as a physical monster, that started to get the wheels in my head turning about like what story could do. And I also like Joss's storytelling style. It's like a really amped up, Stan Lee. Like if you go back and read those early Spider-Man issues from the 60s and 70s, Stan's just constantly putting Peter Parker through the grinder. Like his job, being Spider-Man is constantly messing up his life, like with Aunt May and with Gwen Stacy and all of his friends, and he's always having to make the right choice, and it's always a win and a loss. Like he beats Doctor Doom, but he misses his date with Gwen Stacy, and like now she doesn't want to see him. And like Joss does that in his story, like, spoilers for a 20-year-old episode of television, but at the end of season two of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel has been evil all season and finally gets his soul back at the last second, but it's too late. Like Buffy had to kill him anyway to the world. So she finally, she gets her love back, but she also has to essentially murder him to save the world. And like, they save the day, but at a huge personal cost. And like, that's the kind of storytelling that really speaks to me. So a ton of that is in Grief. Like half the stories really fit that model of like it being both a win and a loss, on some level. And I don't want to spoil sort of how Dead End Kids ends, but there are elements of that sort of done a new way. Like my storytelling's evolved a little bit and become more my own. Cool. So like those are the kinds of things that tend to influence me.
We kind of my wife and I have gone through a bit of a Buffy renaissance recently. We've watched we started from season 1 and worked our way through. You're absolutely right. Those early episodes, seasons 1, because they're on the hellhole, it kind of, someone feels that they're invisible, they actually turn invisible.
Yeah, that's the one that I always go to. I'm like, I love that episode, and it's not even one of the better ones. It's it's the literal like manifestation of the metaphor of this girl feeling like an outcast.
Definitely. It's interesting you mentioned Joss Whedon. A couple of things, a bit of a sideways step, I guess. What did you think of Justice League the movie? Because you had two distinct styles crashing together in that. You had Zack Snyder's dark DC universe, and then allegedly Joss Whedon comes in and tries to, lighten stroke avenge it up. Did you feel that the movie was disjointed in some way, or did you just enjoy it for the spectacle that it was?
I guess I can answer both of those questions with a yes.
Okay, that's cool.
I think that Zack Snyder had a very specific vision for Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman and Justice League, and that his style of storytelling is very disjointed. It's like a very postmodern. Like if you watch Man of Steel, like you constantly throughout the movie getting these flashbacks that they add some historical context, but like they don't have any rhyme or reason to how they're laid in there or anything. So like I think that anything like that's in Batman versus Superman or in Justice League is a stylistic choice. I think there's a ton of good stuff, especially with the Superman character across those three movies. Mm-hmm. Superman is sort of like a Christ-like figure, and like he's really drawing on Grant Morrison's All-Star Superman in there a lot. But at the end of the day, like the execution just wasn't up there, and I have a pretty good eye for Joss's directing style at this point. So like, I think I know which scenes sort of he added to the plot and sort of redid. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig.
There goes my Friday night. Okay. So on the second side question I've got is, are you reading the new Buffy book?
I am. And you know what? This is going to sound awful, but I'm having sort of my very first, that's not my version of the character moment in my life. Like I'm very, like I'm fine, like with Spider-Man getting rebooted and the New 52 is how I got into DC Comics. So like all that stuff like doesn't really bother me. But like I'm reading this and I'm like, that's not my Buffy, and that's
Panda's not a vampire. How did that happen?
And Willow's supposed to be a nerd. From an entertainment point of view, I think the book's super entertaining. The art is really good. Jordy is doing a wonderful job writing it, which is, from coming from the art side of things and then becoming a writer, like that's always really impressive to see.
Especially from a colorist type of view, you always hear about like artists being writers.
Yeah. 100%. And like I'm a huge Jordy fan. Like colors are my favorite part of comics. So I paid attention when what was the book that was out. Oh God, Savage Town. Like I enjoyed that a lot, and I'm a big. I think Boom is probably the publisher that's putting out the most stuff that I enjoy right now. Like I'm a huge fan of their Power Rangers line of books. Like, it was one of my first loves, and they're really knocking me out of the park with those. So like I 7 out of 10. If the Dark Horse stuff was a 10, like
Dark Horse were great at doing their licensed stuff.
Yeah, I was on another podcast last night, and I was
There's another podcast? Oh, man.
Ooh, you are in for a rude awakening. There are at least 3 more podcasts. But yeah, I spent about half the time pitching the host on going back to try those season 8 books, and they're not perfect, but I got more of my girl, so I was happy.
Okay, cool. Back to your work then.
All right.
On the cover of Grief, there's a quote from Ryan K. Lindsay, who I absolutely love. I love his work. One of the most impressive entries into comics I've seen a creator make. How does that level of impact and respect feel, especially as it comes so relatively so early out of the gate?
It's so long ago now. It's not even that. It's 3 years ago, and I can't even remember how I got in touch with Ryan. Like I think I backed one of Ryan's Kickstarters, and then I shot him an email, and like we've been going back and forth ever since. And he's probably one of the very first people in the comics industry to sort of give me the time of day. And he's just been so kind and gracious, and like really just a good guy. He's very talented too. Like, if anyone listening is not getting his newsletter every week, like go sign up for his newsletter. It's just got so much good stuff in it. And he's just a good guy. And he was one of the first people to read Grief. And he just was so positive and motivating for me to keep going. Like, everything in Grief it's literally the first 10 things I've ever written in comics. Like I don't like to let scripts go to waste, so I always just keep working at them until they're good enough to be printed. And for somebody whose opinion I respect tremendously, like Ryan's, to say that this is really good stuff like that, it's absolutely 100% part of the reason why we're talking today, and that I have a new book that's going to be on stands, and that I'm writing new books that'll be out next year. Like stuff like that's super important, and I think a lot of people take it for granted and don't have it, and it's too bad because there's a lot of talent out there, and like people don't understand how talented they are, and no one's telling them. And I was very lucky that I crossed paths with Ryan, and when I asked him for this pull quote, he gave me the home run of all pull quotes. That all said, Ryan was the only person I could ask for a pull quote, so it was it was do or die.
Ryan is definitely a good guy. I have a colleague on Comic Crusader who lives in Australia. Ryan's Aussie, so he's met him a couple of times at cons. I have been sent a signed copy of Negative Space 1 and a signed copy of Chum, because I absolutely love Chum.
I just remembered how I got in contact with Ryan. This is a lie, but it is also true. The original name for Grief was Negative Space, and I was
trademark.
I was so mad at Ryan, and I shot him an angry tweet that to this day I hope he hasn't seen, but he's never responded to it. But after that, we became friends, and I do hope one day I get to see him in person. I would like to shake that man's hand, because, like I said, I would not necessarily be where I'm at with today without his help.
Okay. Grief is it's a collaboration book to the max. There's yourself, and there's a host of artists and a host of colorists on there. How was it kind of working with such a large crew? Or is it kind of insular because of the stories themselves are quite separate from each other?
So the origin of Grief is less sexy than I set out to write a book, and I did. When I started writing comics, I had a job that I really didn't like. It paid really well and it took care of me, but I just hated what I was doing. It's kind of soul crushing. And my fiance, who was my girlfriend at the time, we sat down one night and I was just sort of talking about how much I hated this job. And she asked me, well, what do you want to do? I was like, well, I'd really like to write comics. And she said, so why don't you go do that? And, I said, haha, it's not that simple. She's like, well, what do you have to do? And I was like, well, I have to, take the time to learn to write comics and there's so much to learn and do. And essentially the end of that conversation was her giving me permission to quit my job for a year and pursue comics and see if I could do it. Which was huge, even more so than Ryan. Like I owe her my thanks for where I'm at today. So that was in March of 2015 or April of 2015 area. It was the same week that the Netflix Daredevil series premiered. So I think it was March. I started trying it. Like I have a lot of training in creative writing. I have 2 master's degrees in creative writing. I have an undergraduate degree in English and one in communication. I had a graphic design minor, and all the jobs I had sort of had in some way prepared me for comics production and networking and stuff like that. So I had a lot of the skills, but I had a hard time sort of organizing them into sort of a usable framework for creating comics. So I got involved with an online comic school called Comics Experience, which is run by Andy Schmidt, who used to edit at Marvel. He worked on books like Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy when Dan Abnett was writing it with Artie Lanning.
Yeah, Andy Lanning.
Andy Lanning, yeah. He was involved with Civil War a whole bunch. So this is a guy who knows his stuff. And I took a class with him, and essentially that class gave me like the framework I was talking about that I needed to be able to do this. And I walked away from that class with a script for a story called Embrace, which ended up being the last story in Grief, which it's about a father and his autistic son, and just how hard like a day in their life together is, and how they sort of figure out how to get through it and navigate one another. And then like I had a short story, I got it drawn, I got it colored, and I really sort of got addicted to making comics. Like I felt like I got that finished product and I was like, wow, this is something that makes me feel good. And like, I really love doing it. And I feel like I'm kind of good at it. Like I want to keep doing this. So I wrote 9 more stories between April of 2015 and December of 2015. And at some point, these are all sort of portfolio pieces, things that I could show to editors, or just me trying like a new story genre that I hadn't tried before and sort of flexing and building my writing muscles. But at some point I realized that I was writing about the 5 stages of the grieving process without sort of recognizing it. And then once I did recognize it, I sort of started doing it more purposefully. And that's sort of where the genesis of Grief came from. I don't remember what the question was, but I think I'm starting to answer it.
All right, that's fine. That's good. It's about the collaboration of between.
Oh, right. Okay. So on Grief, I think if I'm counting correctly, I had 10 collaborators, 5 of which were artists, or 6 of which were artists, 3 colorists, Sean Reinhart, who did all the letters, and Danny Martins, who did the cover. And just because of the nature of how like the stories were sort of done 1 at a time, or maybe 2 at a time, and sort of mixing and matching creators to fit the stories. Like the second story in there is called The Debt, and it's about a sort of a magic story about a young woman who's fighting a demon to protect her grandmother. And like that's a grittier story. So that one is the only one in the collection that's sort of handwritten, and it's almost like Kevin Eastman-y. It's very inky, and
yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I mean that's overselling it as how inky it is, but it's definitely like compared to the other stuff in there, like it's a very different visual look. And that was sort of purposeful. So like building up the teams was something I tried to be thoughtful about, and but like never did I feel sort of overwhelmed or anything. Maybe the first time when I was collaborating with Naynad and Esther and Sean on Embrace, just because I hadn't done it before. But no, I mean like it was a sort of 8-month process. And by the time I was done with the second or third story, I really sort of had it down pat.
Mhm. Yeah, cool. I like I've read it cover to cover a couple of times, and there's some stories there that really kind of, um, for me, speak out more than others, which
Mm.
is fine because there's 10 to choose from. They can't all be. Do you have a particular favorite that you look at it and you think, man, I absolutely totally nailed it that time?
And I think Embrace is probably to this day still my favorite and strongest thing I've ever read. Like it really just it's exactly the kind of stories I want to be writing. Like I love magic and fantasy and monsters and aliens and sci-fi. But at the end of the day, like none of that matters if you're not telling a good story about characters.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can write the best Star Wars, but if you don't give a crap about Luke, like it doesn't matter. And I think that story has it is by the end of it, you care about what happens, or at least I do care about what happens to these characters next. And that's sort of like a good problem to have and a bad problem to have because you got to do better every time you write something new, hopefully. And then sort of to come out the gate swinging with something very strong and that a lot of people connect with sort of sets a high bar for you.
Yeah.
I do like. I think I reread it every once in a while just to refresh. I don't know that there's any story in there that I don't like. I think
I didn't ask that question.
If I had to pick, I like the first story in there a lot. It's called the one about the two police officers trying to deal with the woman who's having sort of an episode.
Yeah, I like that one a lot.
I call that my Scott Snyder story actually. There's an issue of Batman. It's the second Joker arc from his Batman with Greg Capullo, where he sort of Jokerizes all of the Justice League.
Oh yeah.
And in that first issue, it opens with some narration about the history of the sort of Gotham Opera House and why they have sort of this scarecrow of Apollo hanging up in the rafters for good luck. And like Scott does this thing where he builds up a history or some narration at the beginning, and then it always pays off at the end. And at the end of the issue, you get Superman, who's essentially, a modern day version of Apollo, who's a sun god, crashing through the roof of the opera house, all jokerized. And it's like this sort of big, fun splash page moment. But I'd really tried to tap into some of that sort of narrative setup and payoff in that story. And I think, I think that was the second thing I ever wrote. And I feel like it, for somebody who was that far along in their writing career, which wasn't very far, I did an all right job. I'm proud of that story still.
Excellent. There's lots of emotional moments in Grief. It's very much like you said, Josh Whedon, in that there's wins and there's losses and there's you don't necessarily see them straight away. You have to sit back and reflect a little on some of the books and some of the stories, so that kind of works. With so many different stories going on, are you a bit of a takeover Ted, or are you quite relaxed and let the artists do their thing and kind of come to a collaborative decision-making process?
I made a decision early on that I was going to let people who know better than me make decisions about these kinds of things. Like I'm a graphic designer in addition to like being a writer. So like I designed the book, like I didn't do the art for the cover, but I designed the layout and the logo and, the credits pages and sort of like, a lot of this stuff going on in the book. But like I said, I'm not an artist, and I would never be able to create that cover. Danny did a killer job making that cover. Like it's exactly what we talked about. I enjoy collaborating because I'm still a fan. Like when I get pages in and they're different or better than they imagine them on the page, like I still get fanboy moments. I'm working on a book right now it's essentially my take on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I really like where it's going. And Chris Madd, who did the covers for Dead End Kids, is doing the interiors for that book. And he delivered some pages last week, and they're what I asked for in the script, but they're so elevated beyond what I was looking for. And there's lots of little Easter eggs and stuff. And like, that's the kind of stuff that I feel like, I look at Alan Moore's script from Watchmen, and Alan can get away with that. Like him and maybe a handful of other people can write like that, but anyone else, that would just be so overbearing and controlling. And I feel like to be the artist on that book, it would be very limiting and soul crushing and not make the work fun. Mm-hmm. And it's not really a collaboration at that point, you know what I mean? And like I said, I want to be a good collaborator because I want to continue to work with these people. And I also want to have a good like these are my friends at the end of the day.
Yeah. Cool. Excellent. Very good answer. Dead End Kids is more of a traditional creative team format. How did that change your creative process, if at all, from going from like a cast of 27 million down to just you and an art team?
I don't know that it changed very much. Like for my day job, I work at a tech startup in San Francisco, and
is this the one that you hated, or this is the current?
Exactly.
All right.
But it's a small company. There are 6 of us here and 2 of us overseas. So it's a lot of learning on the fly and doing things I've never done. And one of the big things that gets talked about in startups is scaling. How you figure out how to do something and you figure out how to do it bigger. And I think for, at least for me, that's what comics was like. So once I wrote a short story, like it was just about scaling it up to, 22 pages to be a one shot or 80 pages or 60 pages to be a miniseries. And it's I don't know. I have a pretty, scalable way of creating stories. It's a work in progress. Like I've still got plenty of writing to do and learning to do, but I've got a pretty good way of going about it, I think. And it's not, I don't think there's been any kind of learning curve in terms of like, that's not true. There's definitely like little things you learn. Like, I never had to write a cliffhanger before I wrote my first issue of a miniseries. But like, once you do it, like, then you can do it again. And then, if anything, this was an even easier project because Nanad did the colors and the art, and then Sean came on to do the letters again. I'd worked with both of them on Grief a bunch, and it was just me and 2 other people. So like it was less herding of cats, and everyone was sort of on task and doing their part, and we had like a good sort of conveyor belt thing going where Nanad would give me a page that was drawn and colored, and I'd hand it off to Sean, and Nanad would start on the next page, and we sort of just wash, rinse, repeat, and the whole thing went by very quickly. I think Dead End Kids was done faster than Grief in terms of production time.
Which kind of figures, I guess, with less people involved and stuff. That's making sense.
Yeah, it's a larger page count, and it's a different kind of story with a bigger cast of characters and more going on. But like you said, having less sort of hands in the pot made it a little bit more streamlined.
Yeah, I can say that. So Dead End Kids even has a misfit group of kids as their central sort of heroes, protagonists, focus, whatever you want to call them. That type of relationship is quite popular at the moment. Think things like Stranger Things, perhaps currently. Stand By Me, the movie from way back, even as far as, say, Recess, the cartoon show. So was there any sort of inspiration that you drew from in creating the characters and how they interact with each other?
Yeah, definitely. So the sort of genesis of the book was 2 things. The first thing was a little more than a year and a half ago now, I turned 30. And I think a lot of people, when they turn 30, start to get a little nostalgic. Mm-hmm. It's this weird sort of milestone age that makes you start look back. And I definitely did. I remembered going outside and playing and building clubhouses in the woods and sort of being in before the streetlights came on. But sort of as I was remembering all this, I remembered those are the golden years, right? I also remember like that those years for me and the kids I grew up with weren't all that great. Like I said earlier, like both my parents really struggled with drug addiction. Mm-hmm. All my friends had stuff going on at home too, and like we were from like a lower class neighborhood, and like we were poor. Like I mean, no 2 ways about it. So a big part of why we were spending so much time outside is because we didn't want to spend it at home. And I just, I wanted to sort of tap into some of that. Like it was scratching at me. It was like a little demon I needed to let out. The other thing is I'm like all those stories you mentioned, Stand By Me and Stranger Things, that's sort of coming of age stories, found family, group of friends stories. Like they're some of my favorites. But I have a love-hate relationship with them. Like I love the idea of, these kids who need each other, sort of finding each other and taking care of each other. But the way those stories tend to go, and you'll see this across a lot of them, is, there's a kid who has a messed up home life, and he finds these other kids, and they spend a summer together, and they sort of fix one another. And then at the end of the movie, they part ways, and you find out that they grew up and grew apart very quickly. Like that's the story of Stand By Me. It's the story of even though those kids are coming back together. Even The Breakfast Club really fits that model, and like that just doesn't ring true for me. The kids I grew up with, I really have been bonded for life to them. Like one of my best friends growing up is the best man in my wedding in September, and so I wanted to sort of explore this idea of like best friends means best friends forever, but also I mean you read the book, so like I spent some time on the first and second pages really establishing that this is sort of the anti-coming of age story. It's not what John Hughes would write. It's not what Stephen King would write. It's not about kids fixing each other. It's about the sort of shared traumas that bring them together. On the surface level, Dead End Kids is a murder mystery about 3 kids in the late 90s trying to solve their friend's murder. But at its core, it's about these 4 kids who come from messed up homes who sort of find each other and take care of each other, and find stability in that. And what happens to that stability when one of them is murdered, and how they start to spiral. And it's an exploration of like childhood trauma, in that the idea that like, do these things define who we end up becoming? Like, every Marvel villain, in the Silver Age, Doctor Doom and Mole Man, they all have this sort of like focal point, like where things turned for them and they started to become a villain. And I wanted to sort of explore that idea, like, does this crappy thing that happened to you when you were a kid essentially like set you down this road to becoming this awful adult? So there's a lot going on there, and the kids, they're sort of a amalgam of different things. A lot of them are aspects of myself and my friends growing up. Like Murphy is very, very similar to me. When I was that age, I was really angry. A lot was going on in my life, and I didn't sort of understand why, and I was angry about it. Like, and that's the natural reaction to somebody who's not emotionally mature and is seeing horrible things happen that they don't understand. But also, like, all those characters are sort of very based in pop culture. Like, I don't know that a lot of people are going to pick up on it, but Tank, the bigger, 6 foot something, 14-year-old kid, is based on Bobby Hill from King of the Hill visually.
All right. Yeah, I could say that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those things, like when you say it, you see it, but it might not catch.
It was the Recess thing that I thought Recess when I saw him.
Okay, yeah, no, I could see that too. The sort of neighborhood bully Bulmer he's equal parts Trent from Daria and Fred Durst. So there's a lot of 90s pop culture built into the visuals too, and maybe people won't get that, but I think that building the characters that way helped them fit the visual aesthetic of the time period. If you don't get why, so yeah. That's sort of where the characters came from, a lot of different places.
Cool. So the artist on Dead End is Ninad Sivatikanen.
Man, I wish I knew how to say his last name. Ninad lives in pretty sure Serbia. Okay. So we've never met in person, and we've worked a bunch together, but like I've never heard his voice. I've seen a couple pictures of him. I've been saying Savitikanen, but I have no idea.
It's the second I end.
I'm sorry, Nina. I'm
sorry. So what was it about his style that really suited Dead End, especially after his work on Grief?
Nenad, he's drawn aliens for me. He's drawn monsters for me. But in our early talks a few years ago when we started working together, he really expressed a love of just drawing sort of dramas and from life.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I started writing Dead End Kids, I probably without even realizing it, like had him in mind. Like the book looks exactly like I wanted it to in my head, like the sort of desaturated color palette, no borders on the panels, like very sort of muted color palette.
It looks
And
great.
I really think so. I mean, my goal was to write indie book that looked like a professional, like I wanted a book that looked like it could be an Image.
Okay, well, because I see lots of books, as you can imagine, I think the color palette used fits very much the one similar to Dynamite's James Bond books.
Yeah,
some of those have that kind of have that kind of same washed out feel, because whilst James Bond is supposed to be timeless, the various writers do kind of pick a niche that they're aiming for. So I think that color kind of, it reminded me a little bit of that style of book. So well done. Dynamite, pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. I mean, one part of it, when I talked to Nanad about the colors, was I really, there are actually two things that really affected the decision. One, the book is set during the winter, and while it's not explicitly stated in the book, the book is set in New Jersey, where I grew up. So like winters in New Jersey are they're wintry, like especially before like global warming really affected how winters happen. Like we got a lot of snow when I was a kid in December and January and February, and like the lakes nearby and the creeks they froze because it was so cold. And like it's almost like kind of barren looking in the winter there. So we really wanted this to feel and look wintry. The other thing is, and this is maybe something most people won't pick up on, and that's fine. But when I talked to Sean about what I wanted for the lettering, the creator we wanted to model was a guy named Russ Wooten, who works a lot with Rick Remender. He's the letterer on Death or Glory. He's the letterer on I'm pretty sure he's the letterer on a Deadly Class. But he's got like a very flat lettering style. Like sound effects really sort of tweak me out. Like when I read like a DC book and I see like the sound effects, they always look like they're on top of the art rather than part of the art.
Yeah, I can say that.
That's part and parcel of superhero comics, and that's fine. But I really like when the sound effects are part of the art. So we went for very flat sound effects, panelless word balloons, sort of colors that match and also popped for some of that. But having the desaturated color palette and that very wintry look really made it easier to make the sound effects look like they were part of the art rather than on top of it, because they weren't competing with like a lot of shading and like they're just like these small considerations. And Nanad and Sean just really, really nailed it. I probably talked to Sean more about the letters than I did Nanad about the art. Like it just, that's how much thought went into it. And maybe a lot of people won't even notice or think twice about it. But for me, that was really important.
Well, I got called out. Well, not me personally. Last year, Taylor Esposito who's very prominent on Twitter, saying that letterers should get credit for the work that they do because it's really important. And when I did reviews for Comic Crusaders, I started giving letterers their due credit every time. So, speaking as a reader of comics, as a fan and as a reviewer, letters are always massively important. And I totally get how that sort of a muted winter scene, the sounds would be flattened by the lack of atmosphere. It'd be loud, but it'd still kind of not be as voracious, I guess. So it's it works really well. So that's really tip of the hat there to everyone involved. Okay. How do you feel, off topic slightly, how do you feel about the rumoured closure of Vertigo at DC? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, they didn't give me a gig, I'm fine.
Yeah, no, you know what it is? It's a couple things. Like first and foremost, I really haven't. I'm too young to have really experienced like the heyday of Vertigo. Like I'm reading Sandman for the first time right now. Um, and at the time when Sandman was coming out, I can definitely understand why it was mind blowing and it was this very different thing. But I'm reading comics almost 30 years later, and so much of that, what was good about it, is proliferated into regular comics. Like just because people have been studying Sandman, that like what I'm experiencing is it's still very good and it's still sort of revolutionary. But I don't think for me it's as good as it was for somebody reading it in the late 80s. Okay. Just because I've seen some of these tricks, done because other people have read this before. So books like Sandman and I'm reading American Vampire right now, which is a lot newer. I've read Scalped, and I think 100 Bullets was at Vertigo. But I didn't read these things as they were coming out. I sort of read them retroactively. So like the idea of Vertigo being like this force it never was the case for me because I've just been reading sort of in silos and not reading them as they come out. The other thing is, I think after Shelley Bond and Karen Berger left, like the imprint really lost its magic. Like I'm reading a book from Shelley's new imprint over at IDW right now, Black Crown. It's called Euthanautes by Teenie Howard, and like this feels, it feels like a Vertigo book used to. Like the newer stuff for Vertigo, like I don't know a lot about the internal stuff at Vertigo, but the rumor is like they had a top-down mandate that said like anything that's coming out of Vertigo needs to be able to be made into a television show or a movie. And I just think from a creative standpoint, that's just not, you're not going to make your best comics if you're just trying to farm them out to be something else. And creators aren't going to do their best work if they know that the comics aren't. Exactly.
The work's going to get joined into something else that potentially they don't feel has the scope, and also they get then replaced as writers for the TV show. Yeah. And you're like, well, hold on a second. The amount of movies and TV shows I see, and it'll be like the episode will be bang on, practically the same as a comic book, and then it'll be written by someone else. Same with my wife used to like that True Blood show, right? And I read a couple of the books. I can't remember her name. Is it Charlene Harris? Charlene Harris, I think it is.
I couldn't tell you.
So I expect to see when I watch the show written by Charlene Harris. It starts written by some other bloke, and I think to myself, how can you turn around and say that this is written by you when all you've done is nick the idea from a book to put on TV? And fair enough, there'll be little bits added in and here to make it more TV friendly, but does that work? Is that how it is? I don't know. You've hit one of my buttons because I absolutely hate comics being used as adverts for other things. It annoys me so much. It bubbles my hemoglobin.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with the things being adapted. Like Deadly Class was on earlier this year, and I thought that was a really good adaptation. Rick also wrote some of the episodes, so there's a little bit more of a fingerprint on there than your average adaptation. But I think essentially comics have become the darling of Hollywood. They're like IP farms now. Like it's just like I think Robert Kirkman is a very talented creator, and so is Mark Millar. But I can't help but like when I read one of their books to be like, okay, this is going to be a movie, and then sure enough, everything Mark Millar writes becomes a movie, and like you start to see like the same structure over and over again, and you see how it fits the 3-act structure of a movie, and you see like the same protagonist. Like everything Mark Millar writes has this sort of broken jerk off lead character who's usually a guy, and with the exception of Huck, which I think is probably the best thing he's ever written. That's not a Marvel book.
I love Huck. Huck is a mix between Captain America and Superman. Absolutely brilliant. Love Huck.
Yeah, but you know what? Even Huck falls into it. Like the first 3 issues of Huck are great. Like I mean, you just have this super powered, mentally handicapped guy who just does the right thing, and it's awesome. But then like you get into this weird sort of Cold War 80s,
it gets a bit King Kong for me.
Yeah,
it's kind of like let's use him for our let's use them for our needs and this and that. And I think I was reading it and I'm thinking, it feels like I'm reading King Kong, where they go and capture the ape and then stick him in a circus.
Exactly.
And I'm like, how could you do that?
I mean, I would have signed up for 100 issues of Huck just doing good deeds, and
yes,
yeah. It's just, I actually when I don't know if they still do it, but I guess they do. But the Miller World Annual, not this year, or the 2017 one, I submitted a Huck story, and Mark must have got lost in the mail because Mark didn't pick it. But it was just a really good story about Huck trying to do the right thing. Like, I love that. And it was so different. Like, I mean, Wanted and Nemesis, and I mean, you name it, like all those books really are kind of the same story. Again, it's just about this like screwed up guy doing something and then just kind of being a jerk at the end of it. It's like a less good version of Fear Agent always.
The thing I liked about Hook as much was Raphael Albuquerque's art.
Yeah,
because at the time he was getting like a bit of a backlash for the DC Batgirl cover that wasn't used. So I like to see that he came back and he did something so creatively loved unanimously. I think so.
And like he gets, like I said, I'm reading American Vampire right now, and I've read some of his other stuff, and like he's got this sort of dark, inky kind of style, and like Huck really is more of a traditional line art book, and it looks really good. It doesn't look like a book he would draw, and the color palette is like nothing you've ever seen in a book he's drawn, and it's just it's this hopeful book that's just so like, it was so unexpected between the creators on board and the concept, and like I said, if they did 100 issues of it, I would have bought every one.
The Vertigo question, I think Vertigo is one of those things that kind of ran its course. I totally agree with people like Karen Berger. When they've left, it kind of loses that sort of push and that identity. The fact that DC have made Swamp Thing and John Constantine part of the regular DC universe kind of takes away the things that made them fun in the first place. One was a horror vibe, and one was the spooky occult dude that swears and smokes a lot. And I think independent market has overtaken where Vertigo was in a lot of ways, because there's so many different styles of storytelling out there now, so many different styles of art, different mature books. There's, and it's not just like small indies. I mean, big indies like IDW, Boom, Dark Horse, they're all doing their own kind of almost Vertigo-esque books that are better than Vertigo are putting out right now. So
for sure. Like, I mean, Hellboy is 100% a Vertigo book that isn't at Vertigo.
Yes.
And like half the stuff coming out at Image is the same. Like, I think the Vertigo opened the market to more creator owned and indie style books, and then sort of suffered because of it. Once they became popular and viable, other people could do them other places, and then Vertigo wasn't sort of as interesting and unique anymore.
Yeah, definitely, totally agree. All right, okay, so the last question. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Ready. All right, okay, so you've mentioned a whole host of how you got into comic books through the back door with cartoons and so on and so forth. Does that mean that you have a superhero story inside you? And if you do, which character would you like to take on board?
I actually actively collect pitches in a notebook just in case I ever get the chance.
Good mind.
I like doing my creator-owned stories, and I 100% will be. But I mean, the idea is I would love to leave my mark on Power Rangers or Ninja Turtles. Those are some of my first loves. If I ever got a chance to write Iron Fist or Black Panther or Hawkeye, like, I would definitely do those. I think there's a really good Mortal Kombat style story for Iron Fist out there. In the vein of what Brubaker and Faction did, but different. But honestly, if I could pitch one book and it was a superhero book, I'd definitely pitch Marvel a new Dark Avengers book. And the cast would be Sentry and Moon Knight and Namor and a handful of other people. Essentially like analogs of the Justice League who are all a-holes, and essentially, give them this giant earth-shattering mission and watch the powder keg explode. Like having Namor on a team with Moon Knight is just asking for a fight.
You've got Savage Avengers right now, so you never know. Marvel could come knocking. I said that was one more question, but you've piqued my interest.
Sure.
Which is your favorite Power Ranger team? There you go. Because my kid remembers when he was little. His was Time Force. But I remember them all. I remember Mighty Morphin and Wild Force. And all the rest of them.
I am just old enough that I fell off I think with Power Rangers in Space, or the very beginning of the Lost Galaxy, which was the season after that. So around 2000. I have slowly over the years been introduced to other teams. Like I could probably name them all by now. And I know specific characters, and I am actually rewatching the sort of franchise in its entirety. Like I'm in the middle of In Space right now. So like I'm on a mission to know it better than I do. I think the Zeo team is probably my favorite. Like I think it had the best theme song. I think it was a really good escalation of I think that's where the like plot of the show really thickened and became an ongoing plot. Like the first 3 seasons of Mighty Morphin were there was like some ongoing stuff,
the Green Ranger stuff,
and then the White Ranger stuff, and but like Zeo really is like the start of a 4-season arc that ends with Lost Galaxy, and Lost Galaxy. So like, and it's just I think that was like the first sort of sophisticated storytelling that I'd ever seen, and it was done through a children's show, which has always sort of blown my mind. That all said, there are some Rangers from later seasons that I have fell in love with. Just Lauren Sheba from what team is she on? She's on one of the ninja teams, but it's such a cool character design. A female Red Ranger leader, like I dig that. Jen Scott's the Pink Time Force Ranger, and again another female leader. This time the Pink Ranger. Haven't seen a Pink Ranger leader before, and she's just super badass.
That's right, because the red one's the Earth guy, isn't he? That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they have to go back to the time, and they break up at the end. And
what's his name? Wes.
Yeah, Wes. That's it. Yeah. But then there's another one with he has like the dinosaur thing with the beret on. No, he's just.
Yeah,
Quantum Ranger.
There's a ton going on. But my favorite Ranger is always going to be Jason from Mighty Morphin. Like especially when he was in Zeo as the Gold Ranger. Like that's just such a cool design. Such a neat way to sort of write the character back into the show. Who sort of got shafted when Tommy came along. So yeah, I'm not a very big Tommy Oliver fan.
No? Oh,
nah, I don't know. I didn't need to see him as 6 different Rangers. Like, it's fine. There's no problem with him, but he gets so much of the spotlight that other people really get overshadowed.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, cool. Thank you for the Power Rangers introspective. That was really cool.
You're so very welcome.
Dead End Kids is number 1 is out in comic book shops. Is out on Comixology as well?
So the first issue comes out July 24th. It just so happens that for the publisher, SourcePoint Press, I do all the digital publishing, so it will be out the same day, if not a day or two before. It is currently on a digital platform called Spinwiz, the first issue. So if anyone listening to this wants to check it out ahead of time, I think it's on there for 99 cents. So it's dirt cheap. And it's out there in the world for you to check out now. But yeah, the first issue's out July 24th. That is, you can still pre-order it. The diamond code is May 1908, MAY 191908. Issue 2 is in previews right now, and will be out in August. The order code for that is June 1916, JUN 191916. Issue 3 will be solicited at the end of this month when the September previews catalog comes out, so I don't have the order code for that.
It will be Joel something, I bet. JUL something.
Yeah. JUL 19, and then some numbers after that. It'll probably be 1919 something even. But honestly, anyone who's listening, you don't really need to remember the code. Just go in and have your shop look up the book, Dead End Kids. It is available worldwide, so if you're listening to this outside the U.S., you can still get your hands on a copy. And then, so that's it's coming. And and anyone who's going to be at San Diego Comic-Con, I can't say what, but if you want to check out the book early, you will definitely have an opportunity to be able to do that if you come by the Source Point Press booth. Which will be somewhere on the show floor. We haven't gotten our table assignment yet, but there's going to be a pretty cool something I can't talk about.
I am intrigued. If only I had the airfare. For those who want a quick sneak peek of the book, by all means, check out Comic Crusaders for the advanced review that's been on there for a little while now. Go and see what my thoughts on the book were. Spoilers, I thought it was great. So there you go. Thank you very much for taking the time out. I really do appreciate it. I know how busy you are with your umpteen different podcasts. Not that I'm saying that.
It's just there are three. There are only three.
Whatever. It's fine. So this is Joining the Machine, Hughes, saying thanks once again to our guest. Go check out the book, July 24th, and stay tuned to the UCPN for all your favorite podcasts, including the Definitive Crusade, No Prize Podcast, and Flipside Focus. That's the award-winning Flipside Focus, I'll have you know. All right, guys, thanks a lot. Bye.
Visit undercovercapes.com for the latest and greatest podcasts via the Undercover Capes Podcast Network. Also visit our parent company website, comiccrusaders.com, all about comic pop culture.